So welcome, everybody. We are in the midst of a calendar of a series of launch events that announces the Coalition to End Zionist Repression, and in particular, the Campus and Academia Alliance within the Coalition to End Zionist Repression. The coalition itself is a new US-wide effort that is made up of a number of organizations that are involved in both academic sort of narrative work and also like legal defense work and community organizing around Palestinian liberation and against Zionist repression. So among those organizations are the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, Palestine Legal, National Lawyers Guild, National Faculty for Justice in Palestine, National Students for Justice in Palestine, Palestinian Youth Movement, and a number of other organizations, including my organization, the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. And you can follow the progress of the launch of the coalition on Instagram. I'll post or Twitter. I'll post both of those handles in the chat in just a minute. The reason that it's so important to have a coalition to end Zionist repression is that, as we've seen, not only is the apparatus, the political apparatus of the United States opposed to ending the genocide currently unfolding in Gaza, now moving to the West Bank, now to Lebanon, and imminently approaching the rest of the world as belligerent forces continue to escalate. But it's also intent on repressing knowledge and organizing and refusing even the pretense of the political processes that liberalism, sort of holds out to us as ways to make change. The repression of knowledge by Zionist institutions has been so intense that scholars and experts and people who have spent their lives in study find themselves not only unable to articulate the knowledge and the research that they've undertaken, but also afraid, like literally guarding every word that we say. This is not an environment in which we can produce political engagement, much less change. There are some legal avenues left to us. There's organizing left to us. And so this coalition is an intention, a gathering of all of our minds and efforts to try and hold space for popular movement, for political resistance, and for the simple articulations that state violence is unacceptable, that the fueling of state violence in the name of self-defense is unacceptable, and to move beyond critique to try and create formulations where we actually have collective power. So that's the background on the importance of this session, and gathering folks from the sphere of academic freedom and also academic labor organizing is one way that we are trying to sort of set up this infrastructure of resistance and show what's been done and what further we can do. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm incredibly honored and filled with gratitude for everybody who's on this panel for all the work that they've done, and we're lucky to hear from them. We are recording this session so that it can be available to others. There will be resources named in this session that will be provided, and I think there's a Google, if I know Heather, there's going to be a Google Doc. And we are happy to be in touch with everybody afterward to do more thinking together. So I'm going to get out of the way right now and turn it over to Heather Ferguson, who's the moderator. Thanks so much, Heather.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you to Emmaia for introducing our topics for today, and to everyone who's joining in the midst of what I know is an onslaught for all of us on university and college campuses. So part of, I think, of our presence today is to recognize that we have to take time and space in moments that seem increasingly unsustainable to actually talk together, to share strategies, to share like past experiences, and to really just create, I would hope, like a meaningful space for us to kind of exchange ideas and concerns. And that is our role, I think, today, from both kind of the American Federation of Teachers Union context and from the American Association of University Professors context. And we're going to kick off right now kind of from a zone or a space that is intermediary between those two. So Bethany is the vice president of what the AAUP/AFT 6741 local. And she'll explain that a little bit more, but just as a quick handy reference, it's an artifact as a local chapter with national members almost approximating 1,000 of an alliance formed between the American Federation of Teachers and AAUP. And it was formed precisely in recognition of the fact that advocacy chapters, those that are not unionized, those that are not bargaining collectives, are in grave danger. Their members are in grave danger in the increasing McCarthy-like atmosphere that we exist in. And so I'm just going to say one thing on that and then pass it over to Bethany, and she and I will probably go back and forth a little bit here. So I think the goals of today is to recognize two things. One is that over the past 4 or 5 and probably even longer years, we have already seen kind of a assault on higher ed and the quote unquote protections that we thought were set in stone, that are policies in our handbooks and that are part of the mission statements of our universities and colleges. And for a variety of reasons, trustee members, boards of governors, external donors, there has been like a kind of gradual unraveling, not only of the meaning of educational landscapes and the importance of critical engagement with a range of topics, but also a critique and assault on the even the role that faculty play in shaping the higher education landscape. So a constant undermining of any faculty, for lack of a better term, agency in this regard. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like now, but I want to also say that there is a component of this that we have to kind of call out, which is that for a long time, even within that landscape, there was what has been known as the Palestine exception to free speech. And so those whose research and scholarship and pedagogical practices were related to Palestine or Palestinian lives and histories, past or present, had already faced incredible assault on their abilities to practice what they were hired to do. And what we are facing now is actually an escalation of that and a kind of unified front, regardless of any quote unquote political ideological leanings, left or right, that has made it increasingly impossible to hold events, to host series, to teach our classes, or to even engage in scholarly practice. And certainly that is one frame of reference that we need to bear in mind, and why the new McCarthyism touches on not only an assault on higher education, but also an assault on our practices as participants in global solidarity movements. And the two are united in our effort to kind of build organizing strategies that not only reclaim our educational environments, but also sustain our rights to participate in those kinds of global movements. So I'm going to turn it over to Bethany to give you some key strategies and updates from AFT and AUP local, and I'll repost the Google Doc. Go ahead, Bethany, take away.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I am probably going to just focus on some of the practicalities of trying to build power and organize on our campus and what's on offer right now. So as Heather mentioned, about 2 years ago, when the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, affiliated with the American Federation of Teachers, they formed a national local, and that local is made up of about 10,800 or so members from across the country. These are individuals who are members of advocacy chapters or they're at-large members, and we all come together under that local. And what's exciting about it is that it positions us both to connect with AAUP and the AFT to try to garner the resources to bring to bear in this moment. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. And there are lots of ways to plug in to this local. We have lots of listening sessions, and of course, just emailing us and connecting with us. We can try to plug people in. On the AUP side, we just had a nationwide meeting the other day. My days are running into each other. Was that Tuesday? I can't even remember. But one of the things that that was introduced is a nationwide effort to organize every campus, and that's what we're calling it, organize every campus across the country. And so the AAUP has partnered with Jane McAlevy's Skills to Win program, and they are offering their nationwide training program for faculty, staff, and all workers on campuses to engage in a 2-day training, November 16th and 17th. So it's coming right up. But if you can invite at least five members of your campus to participate, we're gonna go through in cohorts to gain really the everyday skills that we need to build power and to organize on our campuses. The focus of that training is on building high participation among our chapters. And we know right now that's just such a struggle. Many people, I think, are feeling rather isolated, feeling very nervous about how to plug in to whether it's AUP and or faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine groups. And this training hopefully will provide some of those supports necessary to figure out how to do that. In addition, I also just wanted to mention that AUP announced this statement of unity, which connected the AUP to NAFT to 10 plus other unions that have all joined together in this statement of unity. And one of those groups is HELU. HELU is the higher education labor union, and they likewise are offering a training this coming November 12th and the 19th on how to organize, particularly among non-collective bargaining units. And so we're really wanting to emphasize that we can all be organizing, even if we're not part of collective bargaining, but we do have to manage the risks associated with organizing in the context in this context of repression. And so I think those conversations need to be had in greater detail. The other thing I wanted to mention is that through the local 6741, we are also working really closely with the AFT to generate supports for chapters and for faculty who are pushing into trying to organize and respond to what's going on campuses. So when you're building these chapters or you're trying to organize, as many of you know, we're all getting on the hamster wheel of like just generating the kinds of resources necessary to do this work. And we want to make that as easy as possible. So for example, building out website tools, membership tools, gaining access to Zoom accounts that are off your university servers, all those kinds of material supports that we need to build this mass mobilization of faculty necessary to really respond to these, repression of academic freedom and our rights to free speech, our right to protest on campus. So we are garnering those tools, and we'll hopefully be pushing those out in the near term as well. And I guess that's sort of, I feel like I'm just kind of sharing out all these resources, but I think it's just important to recognize that there is mobilization and that these organizations are standing up and to try to meet the moment. And there's a lot of challenges to the AUP has been in transition, and so there's a lot of moving parts to the work. It's not perfect, but I think this is messy work, and our hope is that we can just do what we can, do our part to try to mobilize and share resources And I know that Eli and Isaac are going to talk about other resources available through the AAUP. So I will stop there. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Bethany. And for now, we're just going to move through the panelists and then gather questions either posted in the Google Doc or in the chat and get into some more specifics on strategies that we have personally adopted within our own institutions if we find that to be helpful. So I'll move on to Isaac or Eli. Which one of you wants to start off? I'll leave it up to you.
It probably makes more sense for you to go, since we'll talk about the center as a whole.
So my name is Isaac Kamola. I teach political science at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm currently on leave to be the director of the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom, which is located at the AAUP. And the AAUP, this is a kind of an effort that is funded by the Mellon Foundation with the idea of thinking about how to communicate the principles of values of academic freedom to a broad audience as possible. Kind of a premise of the center is that the wide public doesn't know how higher education works, much less know what academic freedom is, much less know why academic freedom is important. And when you have the attacks coming from white right-wing populists and from well-organized groups that don't even have to know what higher education is in order to attack it, that we need a kind of a broad base to mobilize in the defense of higher education and in the defense of academic freedom. So the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom has a number of different functions, but it kind of brings together 15 different fellows with kind of different areas of expertise to engage in particular projects. One of those projects is the one that Eli is doing, and I'll let him talk about that. But we're interested in doing research, and the idea is to produce kind of 3 different types of work. One of the kinds of work is very practical resources and guides. So we've developed a piece that should be coming out soon on how to respond to FOIA harassment, how to respond to Turning Points chapters that may appear on your on your campuses, and also how to respond to targeted harassment and various things. And we're interested if there's something that you want specific resources about, reach out to us. That's something that we do. We try to serve as a hub, a resource that people can reach out to. We can kind of draw on our expertise and time and connections with the AAUP National to kind of get materials and produce materials that are going to be useful to you. The second thing that we do is produce primary research. And the idea is to produce a series of works that kind of help understand the contemporary attacks on academic freedom. The first of these was a report that was published in May called Manufacturing Backlash, which examines the legislation that came out in 2021, 2022, and 2023 legislative cycles, attacking critical race theory, DEI, attacking tenure, undermining accreditation, creating changes to curriculum, like what we saw this week at Florida International, where the Board of Trustees eliminated about 20 classes from the core curriculum. The unelected, politically appointed Board of Trustees. And so basically the idea is to other projects that we are working on are projects like Eli's, but also projects about looking at collective bargaining contracts and the ways in which academic freedom can be protected in collective bargaining. I'm thinking about positive legislation. What legislation can states pass in order to enshrine academic freedom, and is it even worth going through the route of enshrining academic freedom in legislation? And then the third type of kind of product that we're producing is that of to just kind of public discourse, trying to insert a language about academic freedom and the importance of academic freedom into the public debate. I'll give an example. I was watching the launch of the Research Scholars Consortium, which is a project that has created amazing tools for protecting faculty from targeted harassment. And in their launch event, they had interviews from top scientists at Stanford and University of Washington who have been harassed, and sometimes in front of Congress, because of the research that they do on online disinformation. And then when asked, they hadn't framed those attacks in terms of an attack on academic freedom. They were responding to it in different kinds of vernaculars in terms of their speech rights or their professional obligations and duties. And the goal of the center is to really kind of elevate the importance of kind of what is academic freedom, what are the core principles, and how to communicate that to as wide an audience as possible, right? To kind of think about, you know, how to talk to a wide audience about academic freedom, about shared governance, about institutional autonomy, in ways that really elevate this notion of what is lost when we lose academic freedom, what kinds of research is not produced. And conversely, how is academic freedom an important component to a multiracial and multivocal democracy? Kind of thinking about academic freedom in a way as part of not the entirety, but a part of the project of creating a robust democracy and ensuring a human flourishing. So that's the work of the center. I'll kind of hand it over to Eli to talk about his exciting research.
Thanks, Isaac. Hi, I'm Eli Meyerhoff. I work as a staff person at Duke University in the John Hope Franklin Humanities Institute. And I'm also a fellow with the AAUP's Center for Defensive Academic Freedom that Isaac just discussed. But here I'm not speaking on behalf of either Duke or the AAUP. I'm going to tell you about this project that I'm just starting up through the center. It's called the Palestine Anti-Repression Network. We're basically trying to build an infrastructure of support for people, for faculty, for staff, and students who have faced repression for their pro-Palestine advocacy. And this is really a new project that's just starting up now, so we really welcome your feedback and critical questions and ideas. So the idea for this project came from faculty who have been repressed, fired, or suspended for the Palestine solidarity. And they've already been organizing to support each other. These scholars already had a kind of mutual aid network through signal groups.
It might be useful to note that there's a tracking repression doc that has been built and kind of crowdsourced over the past, I would say, month. It kind of started up in the week that initially we were re-entering campus, and it has a lot of resources that we're repeating here, but I think it's really handy. It is, for the most part, also focused on the Palestine exception to free speech that we were addressing before and organizers in relationship to that, but I want to make sure that you have access to that as well.
Sorry about that. I'm back. So basically, these scholars who've been pushed out or repressed for the Palestine advocacy already have a kind of mutual aid network, and some of them had an idea for how to amplify and strengthen this network. Particularly, Mohammed Abdu had this idea. He's somebody who was teaching at Columbia University, and he was targeted for his pro-Palestine activism, particularly for his social media posts and for his anti-colonial courses and for his participation in the teaching at the Gaza Solidarity Encampment at Columbia. In reaction, the administration refused to renew his contract to teach there. And the president of Columbia, Minouche Shafik, when she was testifying to Congress, she said that he will never work at Columbia again. So in effect, he was blacklisted by getting that kind of very negative public attention. But he's continued to seek teaching positions and to organize with other scholars who've been pushed out through this kind of mutual aid network. And so he had these ideas for how to expand and strengthen this network. And he shared these ideas with the group Faculty First Responders, which is a group that Isaac's part of. They connected him with me as a person who could potentially help coordinate this project. I'd already been organizing with another scholar who's been repressed for her Palestine advocacy, Mara Finkelstein, and I talked with her. She was interested in this project, and she's was a tenured Jewish professor who was fired for her Palestine advocacy, and her firing was really supposed to be about a social media post, but really that happened in the context of this climate of conflating her anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, really weaponizing anti-Semitism as a pretext for suppressing her and others' criticisms of Zionism. So I talked with Mara and Muhammad about this project, and we decided to start it up and to make it the focus of my work in this AAUP Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom. So the basic principle behind this project is the idea that we can see relationships of care and mutual aid and solidarity and studying together as the kind of social infrastructure necessary for people to defend themselves against repression and to fight chilling effects. And we see this social infrastructure as a condition for their academic freedom to study and learn and teach and publish and engage in public speech. So I'll tell you then the basic goals of this project. One goal is to amplify the voices of those who've been targeted by this repression, to combat their demonization and marginalization and silencing. So part of this, or to achieve this goal, one aspect of the project is to build a database of people who faced repression. Also, we'll interview people who've been repressed to gather testimonies from them. And for that interviewing project, I'm working with some undergraduate student researchers who'll be doing interviewing work. And then when we have their testimonies, we'll circulate their narratives through social media and try to get their narratives out to more mainstream media outlets. And so in thinking about how people who've been repressed have serious security concerns about their narratives, and want to have control over how their narratives and data are represented publicly. One principle of this project is to make sure that this database will be built and used by and for people who have been repressed. At the same time, we'll draw on the labor and resources of other people, including universities and aligned organizations. So to get people who've been repressed involved in building the database, one part of this project is to facilitate communication among the members of the network. And I think we're going to do that by having a secure communication platform like Discord or Slack, where people can have different communication channels around different parts of the organizing, like legal support and mutual aid for finding job opportunities and particular tactics for combating repression on campus and organizing events and courses. I think that this communication part of the network will be really important for building relationships, solidarity across the normal sorts of divisions in the university, like faculty and staff and students, and across contingent and tenure track faculty, and across the division of people who've been pushed out of the university and people who remain in it. And so in developing this kind of database and collection of testimonies, we'll analyze what kind of support that scholars who are targeted received or lack of support, and whether this support was helpful for them or whether it fell short. And we'll also analyze kinds of contextual differences across the types of institutions and states that created different conditions for the sort of repression they received, and whether they received any helpful support or defense. And then another big part of this project will be to analyze how this repression happened, what particular organizations and funding sources were perpetrating this repression. So this will be kind of mapping the repressive infrastructure of organizations like the ADL and Hillel that have been orchestrating this repression. And in doing this, we'll collaborate with the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism's project, building a database of Zionist organizations. And so in doing this, we'll have a kind of dual approach of developing narratives about the individuals who've been repressed while telling stories about the groups who've done the repression. So we kind of linking these individual and systemic stories together. Yeah, and a final main part of this project will be to help these scholars who've been pushed out find ways to continue doing teaching and learning and studying and public activism. And so in that way, we can help amplify the work for which they were repressed, and thereby to help redirect attention back to the Palestinian liberation movements that their activism is meant to be in solidarity with. Yeah, and this part of the project could take the form of something like a university in exile, where repressed scholars could lead courses, whether virtually or on the ground, in collaboration with participating universities. And in this part of the project, we can think about ways that so many scholars have already been pushed out of the university through kind of contingentization and precarious state of academic life. And so this kind of university in exile could be a sort of infrastructure for connecting the scholars who've been repressed and fired recently with people who have already been pushed out, and to think about ways to collaborate on activities of teaching and learning and research together that they had desired to do in the universities they've been pushed out of. Yeah, so in creating this sort of infrastructure for sustaining our movements against the repressive infrastructures, we need help, we need participants, and we hope anybody interested will join us. We're soon going to put out an invitation to aligned groups like Palestine Legal and National Lawyers Guild and faculty unions and grad worker unions. We also hope that anybody listening to this who has experienced repression, if you're interested in being involved, please contact us. Also, anybody who would like to participate and support this project in any way can contact us. We don't have a website yet, but we have an email address of palestine.antirepression@proton.me. Yeah, please email us to get in touch. Thanks.
Thanks so much to all of you. And I think we'll first pause. I want to just acknowledge the fact that we have in this room that we've created here so many people who have been navigating this in their own lives and their own professional work, and have written many articles that have sustained us and are also the kind of frameworks that we're building off of here. So I want to give the opportunity for those of you in the room to also participate and add in your thoughts. But I thought maybe we could kick us all off with a question from Emmaia that actually brings in some of the key groups that we're dealing with at this moment. So Emmaia, do you want to pose your question about AN and ADL?
Sure. Thanks so much. Here, wait, I'll turn my camera on as well. Oops. Hi. Thank you so much. I actually one of the things that is so wild is I work with all of you and I still don't know all of the things that you're working on that you just talked about. So I feel heartened, and I just want to thank you for like building this infrastructure. Yeah, there's so much going on. And I'm very glad to hear, Eli, that the Institute's data collaborative, not called a database anymore, is going to be able to support work on faculty anti-repression stuff. The question I wanted to ask is a question that's been floating around for a while, which is, we know that university administrators are getting advice from consultants, right? Like, I'm actually going to just post this in the chat here. The sort of advisosphere has been created. There's been a advisosphere created by Zionist institutions, including the Anti-Defamation League and Hillel, but also the much less known Academic Engagement Network, which is a project of the Israel on Campus Coalition, but kind of, like pretends to operate separately. I mean, it doesn't pretend that hard. But is not understood necessarily as part of an Israel advocacy organization. And these are organizations that university administrators consult on everything from, academic freedom to DEI policy, and I presume to legal matters, because these are the same organizations that are involved in suing and filing Title VI complaints. So we know that there's this sort of infrastructure of consulting that is absolutely producing the conditions that we're seeing. It existed before October 7th. It started ramping up after October 7th, especially in response to encampments. And now that we're a year on and we start to see that over the summer, university administrators have been actively engaging with like security consultants and risk managers, right? We know that these organizations are at the heart of it. Okay, that's my pitch, right? So what is AAUP? What is the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom? What is Local 6741 able to do about this? Like, what's our leverage? How do we talk about this? Yeah, how do we get in the middle of this machinery?
Isaac, do you want to start off with that, or?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of, I mean, for me, I think it's helpful to think about the new McCarthyism, and I feel embarrassed using that term with Ellen in the room, because she wrote the book about it, and then wrote the definitive or an important article and the introduction to the Right to Learn, which has that great where she makes the point that I think is really compelling, that the moment we're in is worse than McCarthyism, because McCarthyism didn't try to get into the classroom in the same way that the current form of repression is. And so for me, I think that part of answering this is to kind of situate the current moment around the repression for speech on Palestine and Gaza within kind of a decade-long broader attack on academic freedom and university governance, starting with kind of general attacks on kind of campus free speech and culture war arguments about colleges in general being hostile to conservative speakers and bringing in Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro's to college campuses. And then kind of really ramps up after the Black Lives Matter protests and becomes this organized attack on higher education that is focusing on kind of anti-DEI, anti-CRT bills. And in that moment, like this kind of where kind of these organized, dark money funded right-wing think tanks and media outlets, part of what the thing that they've been doing, and I examined this trend in the report Manufacturing Backlash, is they're generating a parallel argument to the idea of shared governance that's laid out within the AAUP principles, right? So the AAUP has a very clear, they says in order for academic freedom to be meaningful, it has to be institutionalized. The way it's institutionalized is through practices of shared governance, where trustees have autonomy over certain aspects, like how to run an endowment. I have no idea how to run an endowment. And the curriculum, right? And so this idea, it's not a perfect model, it's problematic in many different ways, but there's this kind of this general concept that that colleges and universities are jointly governed. But there's been a whole bunch of kind of an infrastructure, an intellectual infrastructure at Heritage Foundation, James Martin Center, American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and others that have really pushed this argument that shared governance gets in the way, right? That it actually is, the professors don't know how to govern institutions. The version that's coming out of DeSantis and Heritage and elsewhere is that faculty are state employees, so they should be doing things that's in the interest of the state. And shared governance, when faculty create curriculum, we do so in a way, the argument goes, that prioritizes things other than what's in the interest of the state. And so there's these kinds of layers of argument that have been trying to make the argument that appointees, political appointees should play an active role in the governing of institutions, right? And then, so you have this kind of ferment when you have the response to campus protests, and I think that what you're seeing is a kind of an intensification of that argument, that set of argument, that intellectual infrastructure or ideological infrastructure that's been put in place, but is being weaponized using and accelerated in the language of anti-Semitism, right? So this is not a complete answer, because I think there's a lot more research that has to be done in order to understand this network, in order to kind of understand the actors at work. But I think that part of a response, kind of the beginning of a response anyway, is to really kind of lay out, that principles of shared governance, that, what happens at an encampment, right? There may be and there have been examples of speech that was anti-Semitic. There have been examples of speech, but institutions have the means through their own governance policies to address these, right? That's what shared governance looks like, is you have these procedures and policies, and that to really take the time to explain that, like, contestations over speech on campus have they're hard to navigate. They're really hard to navigate. And when you have outside entities coming in and saying, here's how you should navigate this contestation, as opposed to the community saying, here are our principles, here's our policies, here's the facts on the ground, here is the particularities of this institution, and here's the decisions that we're going to make about our own institution. I think that's the model of a kind of a community that's based around shared governance and shared inquiry, that needs to be kind of at least preserved, or at least advocated for, right? And this idea that you could, like, that any kind of outside organization can swoop into a college and tell them definitively what you have to do in order to address this question, that there's simple yes and no answers, that these encampments are simple, clear things, that this slogan, the way it's chanted on this campus, clearly means this thing, and therefore it clearly means that, and therefore this is the answer. That's exactly the violation of what the fundamental principles of shared governance are. And so I think that kind of and believe me, the principles of shared governance are deeply flawed, but I think that they're difficult, right? But I think that that's at least one place to start.
Thanks so much for that, Isaac. And just to kind of pivot, given the fact that shared governance mechanisms and even the platform as a whole has been under assault, Bethany, do you want to talk a little bit and like pitch in here about the response from within an organizing framework?
Well, I was just going to add that, so as we educate ourselves about these various, entities that are driving, really, we're talking about massive political interference in the academy, and whether it's being driven through legislatures or whether it's being driven through our boards of governors or trustees or visitors, they're called in Virginia. There's this massive movement, as we all know. What becomes really challenging on the ground as faculty is how are we tracking all of this? So, there are these subtle, you've got to be paying attention to, your policies and how those policies are shifting in the dark of night. and really trying to track all of that, which is really difficult. And at Mason, for example, they've just changed our anti-discrimination policy to include the IHRA definition and example of anti-Semitism and examples. And and we're trying to push back on that and saying that they're not even following their own rules in engaging in these kinds of policy revisions on campus. And they have completely shut out faculty senates, which haven't always been the the movement builders on campus either. And they're even those groups are being shut out. So I think, in my mind, it's not the sexiest work in the world, but even just trying to push into faculty senates, partner with existing structures on campus to try to uphold those principles and those mechanisms to shine a light on the ways in which these policies are being revised in, vis-a-vis these outside influences, and say, and trying to mobilize around that is a strategy. Again, it might not be the sexiest strategy to get people motivated, but we live and die by these policies. And so I think it's going to be really important. And the other thing that we're demanding from our campus, for example, is to give examples of how they're going to enforce the IHRA definition on our campus. And how exactly is that going to happen? But I fear that we're now at a time where we're actually going to be having to rely on legal mechanisms to really fight back. So I mean, I see organizing as one major channel, but that takes a lot of labor, and then potentially legal avenues as the other. And I'm interested to hear what other people are thinking about that.
I really want to turn it to the audience as well, but I just want to make a quick statement about like what Bethany and I and others in AFT Local 6741 have kind of discerned since attending the AFT convention in July and engaging in conversations with leadership, and specifically also with leadership in higher education within AFT and with legal in relationship to that. And it is very clear that this is not a derogatory statement on AUP, but this is true because they are in a transition. But both AUP and AFT are flat-footed in this moment. There's a lot of, they have not, especially AFT has not had any clue whatsoever about how to engage with faculty in crisis in relationship not to precarity or contingency or the kind of the tried and true things that they had been focused on for a long time, but in relationship to speech and academic freedom, specifically around questions of like weaponizing anti-Semitism in this case. And so in our meetings with them, it was almost like educating them about what's going on, and then them trying to figure out what they already do for other issues and whether that can be applied in this context, which we all know is not going to work. And also, it's all too late. So at this point, like everybody's already experienced policy changes. They've already experienced the kind of training sessions that have been provided by ADL to staff, to student leaders. They just happen, like ADL just shows up and runs those training sessions at the beginning of the session of the semester or the quarter. And as a result, I feel like what we're doing here is also part of educating the unions and organizing and advocacy chapters that we're a part of, kind of escalating up to leadership and playing our role in helping them to be able to respond effectively. And this is what like Isaac and Eli are demonstrating, obviously, like they're coming into the niche and saying like, this is how we can help AUP be more responsive. And in AFT, it's also like our slate ran on these principles, and we're basically like forcing a response from AFT that they were very, very unwilling to provide. Like at the convention, they tried to shut us down. So part of what we are collectively saying here is that it's a combination of like knowledge generation, like tracking all of these things, creating like an assessment of systematic problems and how they're like newly defined, but it's also organizing power and collective action. And the two together have to happen. And they're also the only mechanisms however weak they may be, to protect those of us who continue to be involved in these types of actions. So I'm sorry I spoke a lot right there, because I just want to make sure, are there hands? Like Ellen, would you like to chime in at any point? Please, we should have started off turning to you, but Ellen, you have the floor. Is that a no, or are you trying to yeah.
You have to unmute, Ellen. You're muted.
Hi, everybody. As I was saying, I was in the middle of lunch. And you can see it's a nice kitchen. Anyhow, if you want the recipe for my basil, tomato, and mozzarella salad, I'll give it to you. But anyhow, this has been really good and very useful. And what we're all trying to do is get ourselves up to speed, but the other side is so well financed. They're not stupid. They're very powerful. They're in control of most of our universities. You don't want to hear about where I was. We need to really talk to each other. You know, we need as much networking and just sort of hanging out before we can go back to our own campuses and network with them and hang out with our, the people in our departments who we probably never see, because nobody sees anybody since COVID. I mean, the problems are kind of insurmountable, but we do have numbers. And if we care enough about universities, if we can articulate why we need them, because if we can't do that very well, and that's incredibly hard to figure out, why do we need them? Maybe everybody should go to trade school and get a certificate, from, what is it, Kaplan, BBN, or whatever they are, all these for-profit entities, as well as the consultants. And I'm so glad that we're beginning to talk about this infrastructure that's there. And we have to sort of get people to understand that, yes, these people are really bad. They have a lot of power, but, without sort of exposure, we can at least begin with that. And I think that much of what Isaac and Eli are doing is very promising. And I'm hoping that the AAUP will take over a project that my own little organization, it's called Historians for Peace and Democracy, has been doing, which was an archive of the culture wars. We just had a few people going through every day, reading Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle and looking on what there is coming into their inboxes and putting together an archive of documents that we sort of somehow thought journalists were going to be using, but I think it's really better, invaluable resource for faculty members when you get up and say, did you know that? And then explain that this, we just got a very interesting report from a group at Cornell called, what was it called? Free Speech Alliance. I don't know if you guys have been looking at it. It's a supposedly independent free speech group full of eminent faculty members that thinks that trustees should have much more power. And then alumni, oh, this was wonderful. I loved it. Alumni should have more power even than the trustees, because after all, their lives have been shaped by those 4 years that they spent at Cornell. And the value value, good neoliberal word, the value of their education is being destroyed by these horrible sort of conspiracies of progressives who want things like DEI on their campuses. And so they are going to organize alumni to take over the board of trustees to make sure that such things no longer happen. So what we're seeing is just this mass attack on sort of every aspect of higher education. And you can sort of spend your whole life at it, but I'm really pleased to see so many people here. And one final word, my group, HPAD, is putting on a webinar this afternoon on really is looking at the MAGA world and looking in particular at the Heritage Foundation's 2025 report. In other words, if the worst happens in a few weeks, and the forces of ignorance gain control over much more of the federal government, we're going to need to think very seriously about how can you preserve free speech, academic freedom, and the right to even speak out in your own home, maybe, certainly over the internet, when the government is in the control of authoritarian forces who are intent on repressing free thought. And so with that cheery vision, I guess, I hope you'll, the speakers are really amazing. There is Nancy McLean, who sort of started exposing the billionaires clubs, as it were, and Carol Anderson, who's done some wonderful work on race, and Paul Ortiz, who was very active in Florida trying to fight back against Ron DeSantis. And it should be very useful to watch it. So it's just Google HPAD, HPAD, Stands for Peace and Democracy, and you should be able to find your link. Thanks very much, and thanks for putting this on.
Thank you, Ellen. And we put those links for you in the chat to make sure that people have time to sign up and attend. I'm mindful of our time as well, so I just want to do a final round robin. If anybody has any last words or thoughts to say, please feel free. All right.
I just want to plug in. Sorry, I was just going to say really quick. I want to, and I kind of pushed at you, Isaac, but I do think it would be helpful if we could generate some tools or a resolution language or something that helps us to mobilize, that helps us to just have this national movement where we're all in, pushing in, whether it's through our faculty senates or what have you. But I just think that there are sort of some simple things that we can do to hook in, to begin those conversations and to start pushing that language through so that we can use our shared governance hooks in any way that we can. And so I hope that we can generate something like that together with 6741, et cetera. Thank you.
Go ahead, Isaac, you were about to speak.
Oh, I was just going to say that shared governance and academic freedom and organizing, they of course go hand in hand. And so I think that it's a matter of, shared governance works best when you have strong faculty organizing, right? And that you can get those policies and demand that administrations follow the policies instead of invent their own ad hoc policies. when you have strong wall-to-wall organizing on campus. And that likewise, the principles, the what are we fighting for, what kind of university do we want, is one that looks more like a workers' democracy, where faculty and students and staff and that we participate in the running and the governing of our institutions, and we don't allow external pressures, donors, trustees, political appointees, online trolls to determine what we're doing on our campus. And we can only do that when we're well organized. So it's just a way of saying, like, the kind of AAUP principles of shared governance and academic freedom and organizing the hell out of our campuses, they're not in contradiction, or they're mutually reinforcing. And I think that AAUP AFT 6741 is just a great example of what that looks like. And if anybody on this call is not an AAUP member, I would request that you become a member, and that in doing so, you'll become a member of 6741 if you're not already in a collective bargaining.
But Isaac, let's say that would be nice, except staff can't be members of AAUP.
Yep.
So I work as a staff person. So I agree with what you're saying about these ideals, but I think these ideals of shared governance and wall-to-wall organizing particularly are in tension with each other, because Heather, you said this on a recent webinar, that the kind of professionalist view of academics forecloses possible solidarities with staff workers on campus. And if instead we took on a view of faculty as fellow workers along with other workers on campus, then there could be more potential solidarity and organizing. So yeah, I feel like, AAUP needs some policy changes to enable staff to be seen as fellow workers and members. And I feel like this is sort of a way that these Zionist organizations that Emmaia was talking about have a kind of backdoor entrance into influencing education in universities, because they're targeting their so-called anti-Semitism trainings at staff and administrators. That's a blurry line between admin and staff. But and then staff are the people who do the kind of internal communications work in the universities. So they then transmit these Zionist ideas about anti-Semitism throughout the whole university and influence students that way and faculty that way. So I think, it's a real, challenge when staff are seen as separate and not able to organize along with faculty. So I guess as a question I have, how can the AAUP and AFT become inclusive of staff? I mean, maybe Helu is.
Even know if, I mean, to jump in, Eli, I mean, there's also like United Campus Workers. The UAW has, mechanisms that they represent over 100,000, higher ed workers. From my vantage point, wall-to-wall unionism is so that statement of unity, where you have wall-to-wall unions who are saying, look, to me, no wrong door. Get involved, get in, join something, because there's a national movement to connect us all together in unity and solidarity to move forward. And so I think, AAUP is one route, but there are multiple doors that one can walk through to join organizing. We have coalitions on our campus that are wall-to-wall union coalitions to thwart this kind of segmentation, that is a problem, but I think there is a solution out there as well. And so whether it's joining AAUP or joining UCW or joining UAW or starting something on your campus, for me, it's like, let's just move, like, let's just start building. No time like the present.
I mean, I know we all want to go, but I do think this is an important conversation, and I kind of want to like reinforce something that Eli said, because there is ways in which focusing on shared governance and faculty governance as our strategy is already an alienating dynamic with staff who are always like non-voting members of all of these things. So like, as Bethany and Isaac have suggested, like organizing is the answer, but if the like overarching frameworks and the vocabularies that we're using and like the mechanisms that we're thinking about using to like take back our campuses are still participating in compartmentalization, like we do need to maybe think about like the wall-to-wall organizing that Bethany was saying as an alternative to kind of consistently plugging the shared governance framework. And then there's just the age-old thing that we all work on as like individuals, maybe within our AAUP chapters, is that faculty just like, you know, it's so hard to get faculty to organize. Like they have like this sense of like privilege and status, and it plays right into the like neoliberalization of the institution. And it just like, they give away so much power as a result, but like it is so hard to convince them to think of themselves. I think this is what Eli was saying, to think of themselves as workers. So I do want to kind of reinforce that and to like demonstrate that this kind of round robin of people and voices within this panel is like one illustration of how to move forward, and that we're attempting to embody this like possible new organizing models that have also been picked up, I think, by new National Council and AAUP in this like unity statement. So like, this is where we're going, and we're just here to participate in that action and to act collectively and in good faith with each other in that process. So we're losing participants as we speak. I should probably close out, unless Ellen, did you have something to say? Yeah, Ellen, please.
Okay. One thing to remember, of course, is that today the 75% of all the teaching in higher education is done by contingent workers. And we can never forget that. And that is sort of the way we have to think about organizing. It's much, much harder to do, but they are us. And those of us who had or still have privileged, tenured, and tenure-track jobs need to understand that our fellow teachers are really suffering, and we've got to organize for them as well as for us. And when we do, sometimes we win. And I think, you know, it's useful to point out that the new president of the AAUP was the president of the union local at Rutgers that had a huge strike last year and had been doing such good outreach that the governor of New Jersey intervened on the side of the union, which was wonderful. And they got a very good contract, especially for the contingent workers, the non-tenure track people. But, and here's something we also are experiencing, then the university got rid of a program that was staffed entirely by contingent workers, just like that. So we're dealing with people who fight very dirty, and we're dealing with a really tough economic situation out there now, and it's only going to get worse, and we just have to work harder and harder. And lots of luck, and keep your fingers crossed.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for taking time out of all of your days to be here. Ellen, in particular, for sharing your wisdom, especially since you have this other MAGA event soon. And I want to thank everyone who's here and in attendance. And also the Google Doc can be a live doc, and we'll try to like retain kind of active connection with the groups who've showed up for our various webinars that have been organized past and in the future as well, because part of like collective action is to maintain contact of people who show up and not have this just be a one-off, but to actually consider this a part of building a movement. So thank you again so much. Good luck with all of your various battles, and we're here if you need us.